Good morning, Europe. Welcome to the program. Our top stories for you this hour. Bailout exit day. After 8 long and hard years, Greece is finally out of its third and last bailout program, but not everyone's celebrating. Worst flood in a century. Search and rescue efforts intensify in southern India's Kerala state after severe flooding has left over 350 dead and displaced some 800,000 people. Picking up the pieces. A week since the bridge collapsed, Genoese residents bury their dead and pick up the pieces as millions in funds made available for families of the victims. And over in the Cube, our social media news desk.
Indonesia has been hit yet again by another series of quakes. We've got the latest on the ground.
And cruise ship rescue. The amazing story of a woman who was rescued 10 hours after falling into the sea from a cruise ship. Thank you for starting your Monday morning with us, and we start with Greece, which has now officially ended its third bailout agreement with the European Union. The country has received more than 260 billion euros since 2010 from the EU and the IMF, the biggest bailout in global financial history. Now, it's been 8 years of austerity and unpopular reforms that has seen protest after protest and a government that has changed hands twice. Now, thousands of educated Greeks have also left the country amid record-high unemployment levels, looking for a life elsewhere, as our correspondent Faye Dulkeri reports.
Since Greece's near bankruptcy in 2010, life has been hard for young people. Thousands of them decided to leave the country, turning the so-called brain drain into one of the biggest problems of Greek economy. Christiana Petsa is getting ready to leave Athens for London. She will do her master's degree in finance and she will stay there to work. The crisis caught me and the young people of our generation when we were finishing high school. So we experienced a change in our lives comparing to how we were in high school and mostly how our parents were in high school. Our lives in the last years of school changed completely. We had the exams for the university as well. It was very tough for our family because my parents are both teachers, so they had their salaries reduced many times. The basic salary for the married does not exceed 553.84 euros per month. For the young people under 25 years old, things get even more difficult, with a basic salary at 431.75 euros per month. When Christiana finished university, she discovered how difficult the conditions in the labor market were. When you ask someone to work full-time plus overtime with a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety, this is not a salary based on which a young person could think of being in the same position in the future. Choosing to leave Greece was not something difficult for her. She hopes, though, that someday the salaries in her country will be decent, so that she will be able to return. I hope that within 5 years something will be going much better, that we will finally have some investments so that things can improve a bit, so that we find jobs. I don't think that something will change immediately in our daily lives, though. Studies have shown that brain drain is one of the biggest challenges that the Greek economy faces. According to the data of the Association of Doctors in Athens, 11,115 doctors have left from Athens from 2007 until 2016, while around 18,000 have left the country in general. Yorgos Patoulis is the president of the Doctors Association and says Greece needs to invest in the medical personnel.
We see hospitals that have become old of age, but at the same time, they don't hire people to transmit the knowledge to new doctors. We see the salary is very low and, of course, unemployment.
The numbers of the doctors leaving have been dropping the last years, but these highly educated migrants don't come back.
That was our correspondent Faye Dulkeri reporting there. Now, as Greece emerges from its bailout, it's not the only country that remains a threat to the European financial system. And joining us live from Brussels is Euronews correspondent Damon Embling. Damon, 8 years in 3 bailouts. This is a significant day for Greece, isn't it?
Well, it is, Tessa, I think, because after nearly 8 years of painful austerity and this debt crisis, I think, this is a significant day for Greece today. And I think you're going to be hearing the Greek government saying it's a good day, along with EU lenders. And I think there is a lot to celebrate because there is growth in the economy in Greece right now. Unemployment is coming down slowly but surely, and tourism is booming. But I don't think you're going to see street parties in Athens today and fireworks over the Acropolis. Why? Well, because Greece is still saddled with lots of public debt, more than 320 billion euros right now, or 180% of annual GDP. There's also a lot of work to do within Greece to convince people that the country is on the right track. As you were hearing in Faye's report there, the young people have been badly affected. At the peak of this crisis, there was unemployment of more than 50% among the under 25s in the country. And still people in Greece, many people think that what happened through these bailout loans, which were the biggest in financial history, did more harm than good in Greece. Right now, also, the IMF, which gave these bailout loans with the other Eurozone members, the other Eurozone lenders, they're also sceptical about the future in Greece. They're worried about the long-term sustainability, about paying back its debts, this massive public debt, and keeping on track. Let's remember, Tessa, this is a really complicated situation in Greece after decades of overspending and tax evasion that we were seeing in the country. 4 different governments tried to grapple with this and they couldn't do that.
Yeah, and Damon, I mean, you're standing in front of the European Commission, and surely they will be keen to paint this as something really positive. But is the Eurozone really in a better position today?
Well, I think, Tessa, when this Greek debt crisis first struck, in the wake of the international debt crisis, there was a lot of worry here in Brussels and across the Eurozone, because if there had been this so-called Grexit, where Greece had fell out of the Eurozone, well, what kind of consequences would that have had? Huge potential consequences. That could have rocked the global financial markets and caused turmoil in terms of trade. So this was why the IMF and the Eurozone partners were so keen to help Greece to bail it out. But is the debt crisis over? Are those worries over about the Eurozone? Of course not, because there's still massive public debt in places like Italy as well. Turkey, not in the Eurozone. It also has seen recent problems with its currency. All of these factors are still contributing to worries here in Brussels as it tries to put together a banking union to minimise these kind of crises in the future. But this is a crisis and it's not over yet, Tessa.
Oh, indeed. Thank you for that. Correspondent Damon Embling there reporting from Brussels. Thanks. Now, authorities in Kerala in India are concerned about the potential for disease outbreaks after hundreds of thousands of people have been evacuated into relief camps following the worst monsoon rains in over a century. Now, rain throughout August has led to the deaths of over 350 people, but a break in the downpours means that vital supplies have started to be delivered to those in need. Euronews' Evelyn Laverick has more on the story.
A welcome sight for some of Kerala's thousands of marooned families after being trapped for days without food, water or electricity. A lull in torrential rains has allowed India's Air Force to drop relief bags, stepping up rescue efforts. Incessant downpours since August the 8th have caused the worst floods in a century in the southern Indian state. Scores have perished in the rising waters and landslides.
It's difficult because water flow is very
It's difficult for the people to get to open areas to be winched up due to the fast-flowing waters. So we're providing them with supplies so they can survive until the waters recede. Thousands have been driven from their homes, which have been destroyed by the floods. More than 300,000 families have taken refuge in state-run relief camps, but some there said they'd not been given any food. The plight of the victims has triggered an outpouring of help from individuals and charitable agencies. Locals have rallied to help with volunteers packaging donated food and medical supplies.
Our neighboring state is suffering a lot. I need to give all my energy and my time to help them a lot.
Special trains carrying drinking water are being deployed. Officials are focused on preventing the outbreak of waterborne diseases. The government's also dispatched multiple military units to help reach remote villages. Whole communities are said to have been wiped out by mudslides. The extent of the damage will remain unclear until the floodwaters fully subside, meaning most people won't be returning home anytime soon. Evelyn Laverick, Euronews.
A journalist, Ishan Russell, joins us now from New Delhi to tell us more about the recovery. Ishan, how bad are the conditions for the people, and how does this monsoon compare to others in the past?
Well, this has been the worst flooding in 140 years. I mean, the rains this time around were about 200% more than they were for the previous 100 years. So an unprecedented situation. And of course, that has led to such a situation where about 900,000 people have been displaced from their homes. There are over 350 people who died. There are about 50 people who are still missing, and the toll every day seems to be rising. So for now, the good news, though, is that the rains have abated. The weather department over here predicts that there will be sporadic rains over the next 5 days, but the concern still remains as far as once these water recedes, what happens next. The waterborne diseases and the airborne diseases from this slush is the big cause for concern. And reaching out to people, getting them medical supplies, getting them food, getting their life back in order, that seems to be the biggest challenge now.
Yeah, and the numbers do seem staggering. That's hundreds of thousands of people, and you're talking about disease. How have the government reacted so far?
Well, as far as the government action was concerned this time around, the situation had been developing for about a month now. Initially, people thought that it was under control, but once it started spiraling out of control, not just the federal government and the local state government, they of course played their parts. The Indian Army was deployed, paramilitary forces have been deployed, but the heartening thing was to see ordinary people, as your report also pointed out, reaching out, trying to help one another, people donating their salaries, people donating in kind, in material, in clothes, in food, water, essential medical supplies. So the ordinary people coming out and helping each other is a heartening thing to see, but the help needs to be sustained for at least a couple of months now, because once the water recedes, as I said, the challenge is to get Kerala back to normal, to get these 900,000 people who've been displaced, their lives and their homes back.
Indeed, a long road to recovery there. Thank you, Ishan Russell, talking to us from New Delhi. And still to come on Good Morning Europe, as the death toll from the Genoa bridge collapse rises to 43. Italian toll road operator Autostrade per l'Italia has said that millions of euros will be made available for victims' families from today. And Italian Interior Minister Matteo Salvini says that unless other European countries take in their fair share of the 177 migrants stranded on an Italian Coast Guard ship, they will be returned to Libya. We'll have more for you after the break. Your top story on Good Morning Europe: after 8 years, Greece is finally out of its third and last bailout program, meaning it's now free to borrow money on the financial markets. Now, authorities in Genoa have called off the search for survivors after the death toll from the bridge collapse rose to 43. Highway operator Autostrade made money available today for families, but the company CEO refused to apologize or accept blame for the incident. Well, on Sunday, dozens of protesters gathered to express their anger. Euronews' Hermione G has a story from Italy.
Rescue operations have finished in Genoa after the highway collapsed, killing 43 people. All the missing have now been found. A crushed car was discovered containing 3 people, and a Romanian truck driver died in hospital at the weekend after suffering from severe cranial and chest injuries. The operation will now focus on collecting evidence for the investigation. We have installed an instrument called Geo-radar to monitor the movements and the behaviour of the rest of the structure still in place. This will help us understand if there are any problems or not and how the situation evolves. The government will now launch a plan aimed at making Italy's infrastructure safe. That's according to a government official in a newspaper interview on Sunday. The scheme will include motorways, bridges and viaducts, but also public buildings such as schools. The cost of the project was not specified. On Saturday, a state funeral was held for 19 people, including 1 child. Mourners came in their thousands as applause rang out when the names of the dead were called out. The Archbishop of the city said the bridge collapse has broken the heart of Genoa.
Hermione G reporting there. And joining me to talk about the latest is your news correspondent, Claudio Lavanga. Claudio, so we know there was a demonstration yesterday in the city, and some people, they refused state funerals. So clearly people are angry. So what are the relatives of the victims saying?
Well, good morning, Tessa. Well, there's two reasons why people are angry in Geneva. First of all, of course, there are more than 600 people who were living in those buildings right under, if not next to, the collapsed bridge, who've been obviously evacuated and who may never be able to return home, because those buildings will have to be brought down alongside the rest of the building, or the rest of the bridge that did not collapse, to make room to build a new one. And of course, those people, despite the claims by the government, they will be relocated as soon as possible to new housing. They don't know when they're going to relocate them, where they live, and how they're going to move. So, of course, they are angry. These are more than 600 people, more than 300 families. But in general, the rest of the Genoa population are angry because they say that they all knew, everybody knew that that bridge had problems for a long time. And they say that not enough was done to prevent that tragedy, Tessa.
Yeah, and so a lot of anger. Amid all of this anger, what is the government doing and how is it being received by the people?
Well, the government has pledged already more than $30 million for the immediate emergency it's going to give to the city of Genova. And, of course, it's set up an investigation to understand the real causes of this collapse. But since day one, it doesn't seem to be wanting to wait for the result of this investigation, because since day one, it blamed Autostrade per l'Italia, the company that deals and manages the highways and tolls here in Europe, saying it's essentially all its fault. Autostrade per l'Italia itself said that it pledged €500 million that will be used to rebuild immediately the bridge, which it says it can rebuild in less than 8 months. And of course, some of that money will be used as well to relocate, to make sure that these people that have been evacuated will have new housing as soon as possible, Tessa.
All right, thank you for that. Claudio Lavanga reporting there from Rome. Now, a fire in a residential building near Paris has left 7 people with serious injuries, including 5 children who are in a life-threatening condition. A dozen police officers also received less serious injuries at the blaze in Aubervilliers. Around 100 firefighters were needed to bring the fire under control. Now, buses carrying South Korean family members have today crossed the border into North Korea to see relatives there for the first time since the 1950 to 53 Korean War. The two nations agreed to hold reunions during a summit last April. A second round of reunions begin on August the 24th. And still to come for you on Good Morning Europe, Italian Interior Minister Matteo Salvini says that unless other European countries take in their fair share of the 177 migrants who are stranded on an Italian Coast Guard ship, well, they'll be returned to Libya. And over in the Cube.
The Indonesian island of Lombok has been hit yet again by more earthquakes. We'll have more video to show you of the latest, but first, a break.
Welcome back to Good Morning Europe. Now, the Indonesian island of Lombok has been shaken by 2 strong earthquakes. That's after weeks of tremors that left hundreds killed. Cindy and the Cube team has more for us on this story.
Tessa, Indonesia is still trying to deal with that massive earthquake, the one at the beginning of August that killed over 400 people and injured 7,000. And now the island of Lombok has been hit yet again by a series of earthquakes. I want to play this video from you. This was posted by Indonesia's Red Cross. Right after the aftermath, you see a mom holding her child. What looks like a rescue worker running towards someone who is in need of help. This video shows the destruction in the area, homes that were destroyed. This is an extremely popular area, especially with tourists too, many of whom were impacted. But it wasn't just Lombok that was affected. It was also Bungan Island, which is just east of Lombok. We'll play you another video here. This was a massive fire that resulted after houses collapsed, and this was posted online by Indonesia's head of disaster mitigation agency, showing just the fire engulfing the entire area. And to give you a good idea of exactly where Lombok is located, this is part of a chain of islands in Indonesia. The Star, this is the island in question here, already impacted by a series of earthquakes and now more. The U.S. Geological Survey says that the biggest one one was a magnitude 6.9. And according to Indonesia's head of a disaster mitigation agency, 2 people have died. But of course, that number could change as we learn more information. I want to show you some of this reaction that we are getting online. This picture just speaks for itself. This is in the northeastern harbor, a harbor in the northeastern part of Lombok that was taken, showing a road just split into 2. A lot of people have been posting photos like this one. And we're also seeing reaction, not just to the disaster, but the fact that yet again, Lombok is dealing with this. For example, Francesca writing, "I've experienced 6 earthquakes since I've gone to Indonesia, and it still shakes me to my core each and every time." And this hashtag, Pray for Lombok, is really taking off online. And again, other people saying that they felt the same thing, that they were there. This man saying, "I was there, I felt it, and it was terrifying, the most terrifying moment in my life." Hashtag Pray for Lombok. Graf Antonia was actually in in Bali, which is just west of Lombok. When he felt this, he says that he felt another solid shake there. Again, this is extremely popular, especially with tourists as well. So again, just a series of earthquakes, once again, devastating a country that is trying to still recover from the huge earthquake on August the 4th, and then the series of quakes and tremors that followed. Over 400 people died, 7,000 people injured. This is trending right now. Pray for Lombok as people are trying to recover and help out their neighbors and help out their friends in the region. Tesa.
All right, thank you for that, Cindy and the Cube team. Now let's head back to Europe. Italy has demanded sanctions be imposed on Malta in a growing row over migrant boats in the Mediterranean. Officials in the 2 countries are continuing to argue over where the Italian Coast Guard ship Disciotti should dock. Italian Interior Minister Matteo Salvini says other European countries need to take in the migrants or he will return them to Libya. His threat came after Malta refused to help the boat, which was crossing international waters, saying it was not in distress. Well, correspondent Annelise Borgia, she spent 10 days on board the humanitarian rescue ship, the Aquarius, back in June, and she's joining us now live from Paris. Annelise, clearly, I mean, we know this is not the first round between Italy and Malta. Who should take in the rescued migrants then?
Well, that is a very good question, Tessa. This is definitely not the first time we see this kind of dispute happen. Only last month, a group of 450 people were stranded at sea because of a similar incident. And this feud between Malta and Italy actually started when Italy's populist government decided to adopt this zero-tolerance policy on migrant rescue ships, effectively closing their ports to all NGO ships that conduct these search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean Sea. Italy says it has already done enough. It has already helped enough. They were effectively one of the sole authorities coordinating these rescue operations since 2014. And now they say it's time for other EU countries to do their part. But what is interesting to note here is, one, the fact that Italy is actually accusing its own Coast Guard of not following their directives, which were apparently to let Malta deal with this group of refugees, and the fact that Italy's Interior Minister, Matteo Salvini, is threatening to send the refugees and migrants back to Libya. Well, Libya is not a port of safety. We've seen time and time again human rights abuses reported in these detention centers where these migrants are kept. And so if Salvini's threat was to be carried out, well, there could be legal implications, and it wouldn't be the first time, Tessa, because Italy has already been faulted by the European Human Rights Court because it had sent migrants back to Libya.
Indeed, and this is a spat between 2 frontline countries. But what has the EU's response been so far, just briefly?
Well, Tessa, the EU has, for now at least, failed to come up with a long-term sustainable disembarkation mechanism that would avoid seeing these rescue ships stranded at sea, and these Coast Guard ships, for that effect, stranded at sea with people on board. But for now, at least, it seems that we are far away from that solution. Back in June, that emergency summit that convened in Brussels to try and find and come up with a unified EU migration policy has actually failed to deliver. So for now, we're likely to see more of these cases of migrants, hundreds of vulnerable people stranded at sea, while Italy, Malta, and other EU countries come up with a port of safety for them.
All right, thank you for that, Andy Borges, reporting there from Paris. And we still have a lot in store for you, including more on our top story from Greece. As the country exits its Eurozone bailout program, how has the country weathered 8 stormy years? Plus, this incredible story of a woman who was rescued 10 hours after falling into the sea from a cruise ship. And we'll also tell you why the Russian President Vladimir Putin was dancing over the weekend. But first, we'll leave you with today's No Comment from Kerala in India, where hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced by the worst floods in a century. Top stories on Good Morning Europe. Bailout exit day. After 8 long and hard years, Greece is finally out of its third and last bailout program, but not everyone is celebrating. Worst flood in a century. Search and rescue efforts intensify in southern India's Kerala state after severe flooding left over 350 dead and displaced some 800,000 people. Picking up the pieces. A week since the bridge collapsed, Genoese residents bury their dead and pick up the pieces as millions in funds are made available for families of the victims. And cruise ship rescue. The amazing story of a woman who was rescued 10 hours after falling into the sea from a cruise ship. Well, more on our top story now, as after 8 years of austerity and unpopular reforms, Greece formally ends its bailout agreement with the European Union today. And so as the bailout comes to an end, how has Greece weathered the storm and what is next for the country? Well, joining us live is Professor Emilios Avgouleas, who is a chair in international banking, law and finance at the University of Edinburgh. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. So after 8 years, can we really say that the Greek economy has been improved by these measures?
The Greek recovery is very fragile. Of course, the banks recently passed the stress tests, but the unemployment rates remain high. And the biggest problem that the country faces is massive disinvestment. What Greece needs right now in order to jumpstart its economy, it's an investment shock. However, that's very difficult in a very high taxation environment, and perhaps after the end of the memorandums, the taxation policy can be rethought. And of course, structural reform in Greece, apart from the expenditure cuts and the fiscal savings, has been scarce. So what Greece needs is meaningful structural reform as well, so that it becomes more friendly to investors, domestic investors, but also foreign investors. And of course, the EU should think about a meaningful investment package in Greece. Infrastructure is breaking down. There is no reason to see next a tragedy of the kind that we saw in Italy and Greece. There is lots of room for infrastructure investment, which will jumpstart the economy. Otherwise, the future is pretty grim. There is a social crisis. The unemployment rates have not recovered. Okay. Greek incomes have been more than halved. So in the first week of...
Yeah, you're saying because there's now an improvement, let's say, in the banking and the financial point of view, but then from the people's point of view, it's still very difficult. How quickly do you think that can turn around?
Well, in order to turn around, there is... the Greek economy needs to pick up. Otherwise, in the first week of instability, the markets will sense blood. The Greek bond yields will go up again, and a talk of a new bailout package and a new memorandum will return. What really Greece needs now is an investment shock, an investment bleach. If that doesn't happen, given also the fact that some of its problems are not its own, but generic Eurozone problems, the Greek crisis will return, I'm afraid. Even though it's, of course, very positive, the fact that Greece is out of the memorandums after 8 years, but it's out of the memorandum having lost more than a quarter of its gross domestic product. And the humanitarian crisis has abated, but not to the extent that one would feel comfortable with.
Okay, thank you for that analysis, Professor Emilios Avgouleas from the University of Edinburgh. Thanks. Well, as we said earlier, Genoese people are searching for those responsible for the lives lost in the Morandi Bridge collapse in Italy. Now, highway operating company Autostrade have pledged 500 million euros to rebuild the bridge and support the families. But the CEO refused to apologize or admit blame. The Italian government has moved to strip the company of its contracts, but that will be a lengthy process. And joining me now to talk about the legal proceedings is Federico Mucciarelli, an associate professor in corporate law at Modena University. Thank you, Professor, for joining us on the program. What has the reaction been to the offer of financial aid from Autostrade?
Well, actually, the thing is that the contract between the government and Autostrade is quite complicated, okay? And it seems to derogate from general civil law, or there are several peculiarities. This is why probably, in my view at least, Autostrade didn't say that they are to put the blame on them for what happened. The contract is very complicated. There is a procedure to revoke the contract. So this is the main tricky point. And this procedure, however, can only be triggered for serious breach of the contract. Okay, so and serious breach of the contract of the duties of the of Autostrade. Okay, this is the first thing to be that we should have clear in mind. Is this a serious breach of the contract? Probably yes, because so many people died. Okay.
Yeah. And Professor, I just want to bring up the fact that people are still very angry. So even if there is this offer of money, there's a lot of anger, obviously. So are we any closer to someone claiming responsibility and simply apologizing for what happened?
Well, actually, this is not a legal issue, but I suspect that the reason why they don't explicitly apologize for what happened is that by apologizing, but this is just a guess as a lawyer, okay, is that by apologizing for what happened, they would admit that they are somehow culpable, so that they are to be blamed of it. And they can't, because the risk is very high on Autostrade, okay, in legal terms. Okay, on the other hand, we should also keep in mind, bear in mind that the risk for the government is also quite high. Because if we look at the contract, I have it in front of me now, that is why I look at if we look at the contract, the procedure can be triggered to revoke the concession. Of course, the contract can be terminated for general breach of contract.
So I think from a legal point of view, the point that you're making is that from a legal point of view, they just cannot express any guilt legally because it's sensitive to the contract. All right. Well, thank you for your analysis, Professor Federico Mucciarelli, an associate professor in corporate law at Modena University. Thanks. Now, a 29-year-old man is due to appear in court this morning following the attack in Westminster last Tuesday. And we're joined by our correspondent, Vincent McAviney, who is at the Westminster Magistrates Court. Vincent, can you tell us what is the latest we know so far about this case?
Well, 29-year-old Sally Qatar will appear here at Westminster Magistrates Court later on today. He is facing 2 charges. The first is attempted murder of members of the public, and the second is attempted murder of police officers. Now, it's alleged that Sally Qatar drove from his home in Birmingham last Monday night. He then waited in central London in his car for a number of hours before driving around Westminster and then crashing into members of the public, trying to hit police officers and then crashing into the parliamentary barriers. Now, the police last week after the event said that because of the methodology, iconic location and the alleged targeting of civilians and police officers, they were treating it as a terrorist act. 3 people, of course, were injured. 2 of them minor injuries, 1 woman who did have to stay for longer in hospital. And it said that Sally Qatar had been going through a difficult family time. He was trying, he said, to get a visa to go to Sudan. That was his reason for coming to London to see his sick mother. He will appear here today later on. He will simply have to appear, hear the charges against him, and then he'll be remanded in custody and a trial date set for later in the year or early next year.
All right, thank you for that. Vincent McAviney reporting there from London. Thanks. Now, staying with the UK, singer Ariana Grande has been talking about the ongoing traumatic effect of the terror attack at her Manchester concert last year. 22 people were killed at Manchester Arena in May 2017. And while talking about her new track, Get Well Soon, in a radio interview, the singer said she was suffering from the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder.
You know, you want to just not be afraid because, of course, that's what they want. If you give them that, then they've won. We did everything to not, and we still do everything to not. But the truth is that it's scary. It's scary going anywhere, and you look at places differently. You don't want to give in. You don't want to be afraid, but, you know, it's still there, you know.
And still to come on the program, a warning for the safety of Rohingya women in Bangladesh will be live in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And we'll have more for you after the break. Your top story in Good Morning Europe. After 8 long, hard years, Greece is finally getting out of its third and last bailout program, meaning it's now free to borrow money on the financial markets. Now, Oxfam International is warning that Rohingya women are at severe risk in Bangladeshi refugee camps. Hundreds of incidents of gender-based violence are reported every week. Over 1/3 of women surveyed by Oxfam said they did not feel safe collecting water or using the bathroom. Bathrooms and showers often don't have locks or ceilings, and there are no women-only spaces to wash their clothes. The temporary refugee camps have also been hit by monsoon rains, bringing floods and disease. Well, joining me now to talk about this report is Mohammed Riaz, Oxfam's humanitarian program coordinator. Thank you for joining us on the program today. Can you tell us the main findings? Why are women, Rohingya women, in such big risk?
I think it's really important to understand this refugee crisis is one of the large crises at the moment in the world. We had 700,000 the refugees crossing the border in a period of an year. So it's one of the world's largest refugee crises at the moment. So when the refugee crisis started last year in August, a lot of construction were done in a very fast and speed way to make sure people meet the basic needs. So at that time, many standards were not met, and I think that's one of the main reasons we have this kind of issue now. Especially we find in the camp number of latrines without lockable doors, certain the shower cubicles without roof, and the women what we interviewed. Clearly said that they don't feel comfortable in using them. And also the lighting facilities in the camp is not adequate. So women, especially in the night, they mentioned that they don't feel comfortable to use the latrine and the washrooms in the night time as well.
All right, so these are the problems, and you talked about standards not being met. Do you think you're any closer to having those standards met and things improving?
Bangladesh government and the humanitarian organizations are doing extremely good job now. We need to understand the scale here. We have around 700,000 people. In addition to the 300,000, they already stayed here. So we have close to 1 million Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. If you look at Rohingya people are more in Bangladesh than in Myanmar now. We should thank Bangladesh government for letting 1 million people in, but we all working so hard to make sure these standards are met. So there are a lot of repairs working going on at the moment. You mentioned about the monsoon. It's really important to keep in mind that we are still in the monsoon period. Monsoon is from July to September. So if the rain, if we started getting more rain, then the things can go to worse.
All right. Thank you for that. Mohammed Riaz, Oxfam's humanitarian program coordinator there. Thanks. Now, Germany's foreign minister has called for a tough line on Russia as Angela Merkel and Vladimir Putin held talks this weekend. Although tensions between Russia and the West remain fraught, Merkel has called for a permanent dialogue with the Kremlin. Joining us live now from Berlin is your news correspondent, Jessica Salt. Jessica, what was discussed at this meeting?
Well, Vladimir Putin and Angela Merkel discussed several issues. They discussed the ongoing conflict in Syria and also the need to maintain a ceasefire in the Ukraine. But the fact that these two leaders addressed the press before their working meeting and afterwards was seen as a sign that perhaps they were not going to see eye to eye on these major issues. One point in which Vladimir Putin and Angela Merkel will be necessarily working very closely is on the completion of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which will see Russia be able to transport 100 110 billion cubic meters of gas along the Baltic seabed straight into Germany every single year once it is completed, and then Germany will become a transport hub for this Russian gas. It's something that still remains contentious in Germany. It's certainly something that's been criticised quite a lot by US President Donald Trump, as it will see Germany sees quite reliant on Russia moving forward. But it was defended by both leaders on Saturday. Vladimir Putin saying it's just an economic project, and Angela Merkel saying, of course, that it's important moving forward. It's an important project for both countries.
All right, thank you for that. Jessica Salt reporting there from Berlin. And still to come for you on the program, we'll hear how this woman survived 10 hours at sea after falling off the back of a cruise ship. And over in the Cube,
President Putin attends a foreign wedding, of Austria's foreign minister. But was this really just a dance? That's coming up after the break.
You're watching Good Morning Europe. Welcome back to the program. Now, a British woman has survived after falling off a cruise ship in the Adriatic Sea and spending a night in the water. The 46-year-old woman, who identified herself as Kay, was rescued by the Croatian authorities on Sunday morning. Your News' Alistair Sanford joins me now in the studio to tell us more about this incredible story. Alistair, tell us.
Absolutely. This woman is very lucky to be alive. She was on the cruise ship, the Norwegian Star, which was on its way back to Venice after a tour of the Greek islands. And just before midnight on Saturday, she managed to fall into the sea from the back of the ship. Exactly how that happened and exactly how she then survived in the water isn't known. What is known is that the alarm was raised and she spent 10 hours in the water before being rescued. The Croatian authorities picked her up on Sunday morning. She gave a very brief interview to Croatian TV as she came ashore at Pula. Let's have a look at what she said.
I fell off the back of the Norwegian Star, and I was in the water for 10 hours.
Okay.
So these wonderful guys rescued me.
Your name is?
Kay. I am very lucky to be alive.
Kay from?
From England.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Now, that's all she said. At that point, she was whisked away for a checkup and she's said to be in good health. Details have since emerged of the rescue operation. A patrol boat and a spotter plane were used in the search. It's thought that other boats, including civilian ships, were used too. Finding her wasn't easy. The Croatian Navy used data on the state of the sea and the wind to pinpoint her exact location, and she was found just over a kilometre away from where it's believed that she fell into the sea. And within 5 minutes, a rescuer had swum out to save her. Now, the Croatian Navy say they're delighted with the operation. They're delighted at having saved a human life, and the circumstances are now being investigated.
It's certainly a great story for her to tell and retell in the future. Thank you for that, Alistair Sanford. Now, the Russian President Vladimir Putin, he stole the show and certainly raised a few eyebrows when he attended the wedding of the Austrian foreign minister. Cindy from the Cube has this story.
Well, Tessa, Putin certainly stood out as a guest, and there is one moment that everyone is talking about, and we'll play this video for you so that you can see it for yourself. And here he is dancing with Austria's foreign minister. Putin brought a bouquet of flowers. He even brought a choir to serenade the bride and the groom as well. But the fact that he was dancing here and invited to the wedding has everybody talking. He was only there for about an hour and 20 minutes. He went to Austria on his way to Germany for a meeting with Chancellor Angela Merkel later in the day. But this has certainly gotten a lot of people talking because of the fact that some believe that this is really hurting the foreign policy of the EU when it comes to Russia for two reasons. One of the reasons being because of the annexation of Crimea and the sanctions that were in place by members of the EU, but also because of the poisoning of Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter in the UK, and the fact that many EU nations then expelled Russian diplomats from their countries. But remember, Austria was one of the few countries that didn't do that. This is reaction from an MP in Ukraine who says the wedding is a private thing. However, it goes without saying, if you invite Vladimir Putin to your wedding, you are not neutral anymore. And it is very important to know that Austria is currently residing over the EU Council. But we're also hearing from the Kremlin. The TASS news agency, which is the state news agency of Russia, says that the Kremlin is not accepting criticism of Putin over his trip to this wedding. We should also note as well that the foreign minister of Austria, she is officially non-aligned, no party affiliation here, but this is certainly generating a lot of criticism and a lot of controversy. Tessa.
All right, thank you for that, Cindy and the Cube team. And thank you, as always, for joining us on Good Morning Europe. And do stay with your news for all of your top stories. We'll leave you with today's No Comment from Saudi Arabia, where millions of Muslim pilgrims are gathering for the annual 5-day Hajj.